I started these types of deep dive videos as explaining insert band name, artist, or music genre. But now I'm just going to rebrand it altogether to make it more simplistic, not like this is really anything original, and just call it the history of insert band, artist, or music genre here. And we're going to continue it with the history of Agalloch. For those who are unaware, Agalloch is I'll just save my breath here and call them a metal band originally formed in Portland, Oregon in the year of 1995. As we know of them today, it consists of 3 key members, that being John Hamm, who is the vocalist and plays guitar, Don Anderson, who's the guitarist, and Jason Walton, who plays bass. Although, when they originally started out and released their debut demo back in 1997, From Which of This Oak, the lineup was a little bit different. While at this point, Don is playing guitar, John is doing both vocals and guitar, along with bass and drums, because at this point, Jason wasn't in the band yet. The big noticeable differences with the lineup is that they would have a keyboardist at this time, Shane Breyer, and additional vocals done by a woman, Karen Cox. Earlier in this video, I stated to save breath, Agalloch are a metal band. And that mostly has to do with the fact that as we progress on talking about the Agalloch discography, it becomes really difficult to pinpoint exactly what style of music they are with just 1 or 2 genre tags when you take into consideration all of the different influences and styles of music that they would incorporate into their songwriting. I mean, even the band members of Agalloch just called their style of music metal, because I feel like for the most part, they themselves kind of lost insight into what exactly Agalloch is musically. But when it comes to their earliest releases, such as this demo right here, you can clearly tell that metal, specifically black metal, was their biggest influence at the time. Case in point, because they've stated in numerous interviews that during this time, early Over was a big influence on them. Which, I mean, if you were to listen to Over's Bergtot and compare it to this demo, you can clearly tell the similarities between the two, along with early Catatonia when it comes to the more of the dreary and melancholic approach that Agalloch does. A lot of it stems from them. It's also worth mentioning that during this time, John Hamm was in his own project called Uncomposing, which he was only in for like a year or 2, but it's more in the region now of death metal and thrash metal, and Don Anderson started up his own band called Sculptured, which is influenced now by more progressive and forms of death metal, kind of influenced by Opeth a little bit, just showcasing again that during this time period for Agalloch, metal was really the driving force of influence and inspiration. The music on this demo clearly showcases that, having more of the black metal tropes that we're accustomed to hearing, with tremolo pick guitars, harsher vocals, and the production value is really rough around the edges. However, what is quite remarkable about this demo is that already this early on, Agalloch showcased some of their signature tropes that we would be accustomed to hearing, say for longtime fans that discover them through their full-length albums going into their back catalog. This feels almost in a sense like this unannounced prototype for what Agalloch was going to become. Because yes, you'll heavily notice the black metal influence on here from its opening moments as it takes up a majority of this demo, but there are other portions on it where it starts to experiment a little bit, more particularly the vocal approach on here, whether it be from John Hamm singing, to Don Anderson's backing vocals, to Karen Cox's portions on this album. It starts to sound a little bit more ethereal, leaning heavily into gothic influence. Along with the track on here, Foliorum Veridum, which gets more into ambient and neoclassical territory, that I can't help but feel like with this instrumental track, it was influenced by, whether they realized it or not, dungeon synth, because I couldn't help but feel like there was this Mortis or depressive silence vibe going on with it. I just want to state before we move on here that even though the majority of attention that Agalloch will receive comes from their full-length albums, as they should, just let it be known that even though this is only a demo consisting of 4 songs, do not ignore this, because it showcases that already this early on, Agalloch was thinking outside the box within the realms of metal. A year later, in 1998, Agalloch would release a promo just simply titled Promo 1998. There isn't really much to say about this promo, as it only contains 2 songs and its overall runtime is a little over 16 minutes. Musically speaking, in terms of the direction they're going for, they're still leaning very heavily on the metal aspect with their sound that still maintains that black metal influence that the demo had. The big difference, however, if we're really splitting hairs, is it has more of a melancholic and doom metal approach. Thus, I would state this is a release where they really lean heavily on the Catatonia influence. The only other interesting fact to bring up here is that this would be their first release where Agalloch would be a 3-piece, consisting obviously of Don Anderson and John Hamm, but having this be the first release with Jason Walton. Thus, this is the lineup that we all know of today with Agalloch. Fast forward a year to 1999, and Agalloch would take those 2 songs from their 1998 promo, that being Hallways of Enchanted Ebony and The Melancholy Spirit, along with 6 new additional tracks, onto their debut full-length album, Pale Folklore. At face value, you'll notice that this album runs for 62 minutes long, which would start somewhat of a staple within Agalloch full-length albums, as all of them range roughly almost an hour long to well over an hour long. Pretty lengthy releases to say the least. And I feel like the reason for this is not just because they're writing long songs where a lot of these tracks will range over 10 minutes plus, but the reason why they're long is now they're implementing all different ideas, not just black metal and other forms of extreme metal, but other forms of music styles such as maybe goth rock, folk music, neo-folk, electronica, stuff like that. Thus, they really need to utilize more time to showcase these different influences, hence why all of these albums will be roughly around 60 minutes and over. With all of that stated, I still do feel like Pale Folklore is, we're still getting the metal side of Agalloch when it comes to their songwriting, because people still label this as a black metal album, but let it be known, there's still a lot of different influences being presented on here. You'll notice there's a lot more acoustic guitar playing on this album, showcasing some fascination with folk music, to the keyboards being utilized on here, done by Shane Breyer, which I forgot to mention, this is their only full-length album where Shane Breyer would return, as the only other release he was a part of was their demo. Thus, when you listen to the composition and overall songwriting with the keyboards, it showcases more of neoclassical influence. To the guitar riffs on this album, which I know a lot of people say it's a form of like post-black metal, folk metal, post-metal, hybrid, whatever have you, but really when you pay attention to the execution and just overall structure of these guitar riffs, it's way more influenced by forms of goth rock, which Agalloch has stated in numerous interviews that they're fans of Fields of the Nephilim. And when you pay attention to just how moody and emotive this album sounds, a lot of those sounds and structures that people fall in love with this album, it's not stemmed from black metal, but way more stemmed from goth rock like Fields of the Nephilim. Now, don't get me wrong here from what I'm about to say next. I think Pale Folklore is a tremendous album. If you're a fan of Agalloch, obviously you will enjoy it. If you're a fan of either atmospheric black metal or black metal as a whole, you'll find a lot of fascination with it. I think it's written very well, and it showcases the next evolutionary step of what Agalloch would do with their overall songwriting. It's just, for me personally, it's not really the album that comes to mind when I think of Agalloch. This isn't really Agalloch fully fleshing out their sound completely, where they become something of a very unique entity, not within just metal, but music as a whole, and we really wouldn't see that take form until at least the turn of the millennia with the next handful of releases. Oh, and the only other thing worth mentioning here is with the album artwork you're seeing on Pale Folklore, I'm pretty sure this is in reference to the wood that the band Agalloch is named after. Then, in 2001, we would get the first ever EP by Agalloch, being Of Stone, Wind, and Pillar. What's interesting to point out here when it comes to EPs, if you're an Agalloch fan, is that you know that They're a little bit different compared to full-length albums, not just because of the durations of these releases, but they've stated in interviews, one such being the interview that they did in 2008 for a DVD called The Silence of Forgotten Landscapes. You can watch the whole thing here on YouTube, and I'll have a link provided in the description to where you can check it out, is that it's an interview that goes for roughly around 30 minutes long. And Don Anderson states that when it comes to Agalloch's EPs, they're more of like these branch-off extensions of what Agalloch is thinking internally and really going down different pathways with their songwriting approach. Thus, all of those influences that I've been referring to throughout this video, they're really leaning heavily now on maybe forms of electronica or folk music. And with this EP of Stone, Wind, and Pillar, there's definitely a different approach here. And while, yes, the opening track on here, that being the title track, is a 7-minute song that contains forms of gothic doom metal and forms of black metal blended together, it's everything past the opening portions of this EP where you're noticing now all of the metal influence has completely evaporated. They would do a rework of Foliorum Viridium, that dungeon synth ambient song that they had on their demo, just cut back a few minutes. But they also would do a cover of Sol Invictus's Nailed to the Cross, where now they're showcasing forms of influence such as neo-folk. Personally, how I've always looked at Agalloch when it comes to their full lengths compared to their EPs, is that when it comes to full-length albums, it's always a melting pot of everything they show interest with or take influence by. So yeah, it's a metal album comprised now of all different subgenres. Yet when it comes to the EPs, think of any of the styles of music that they play around with. They're now going to go down a path where it's just that one style of music that they lean on harder than the others. Thus, the EPs feel like they have more of a focus on one certain influence. A year later, in 2002, they would take those neo-folk influences to the fullest extent and release what is undoubtedly the fan favorite and the album that they're most known for, that of course being The Mantle. An album cherished by every single Agalloch fan I've ever met or talked to. I genuinely feel like when people state that they are a fan of Agalloch or they listen to Agalloch, 10 out of 10 times, I swear to God, I feel like my brain immediately thinks, oh, you're a fan of The Mantle, or my brain immediately thinks of the album artwork for The Mantle. It's just such a massive staple for Agalloch as a whole, both aesthetically, musically, and image-wise. As for the development, songwriting, and understanding of The Mantle, there isn't enough hours in the day to get through every single little bit of conceptual piece that makes The Mantle what it is, but I'll try my best here. As I stated earlier, the biggest noticeable change is this is way more folk influenced. As they stated in numerous interviews as well, The Mantle is really based off of the individuals, a part of Agalloch, showcasing more interest now, not so much with metal, but with other forms of music. I mean, at this time they were listening to a lot of Death in June, Current 93, and Sol Invictus, and you can clearly tell that those styles of neo-folk take great representation of influence here. There's also a lot of post-rock influence on The Mantle, as it's stated in numerous interviews when Don Anderson and John Hamm attended a Godspeed You Black Emperor concert in 2001, which is only a year after Godspeed You Black Emperor released their highly critically acclaimed second full-length album, Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven. It left quite the impression on them. Other bands and projects that they were listening to prior to the development of The Mantle would be stuff like Magua, Sigarus, and even electronic groups such as Boards of Canada. If you take the time to read or listen to any interviews with Agalloch discussing The Mantle, you'll notice that the conversation about metal or metal influence of any kind is completely absent, and they're always talking about either neo-folk, electronic, or post-rock music. The reason for that is you can find out a little bit about it here on YouTube, as a handful of years back, Don Anderson did a seminar for a college with a discussion between the relationship of philosophy, metal, accelerationism, and other stories all about Agalloch. Link in the description if you want to watch that in full. really interesting video. But in that video, he discusses, obviously, the development and creation of the mantle, as it's such a big monumental piece for Agalloch, and discusses that was released in the early 2000s, 2002. During that time, metal, as many people know, had gone through this like awkward phase where now new metal and alternative metal is really popping through in the mainstream, like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, Deftones, stuff like that. Which, no offense if you enjoy that. I mean, even I look back at that with some like nostalgia, as that was kind of like one of the, stepping stones for me getting into metal. Regardless, though, for people who have been into metal longer, say in the 90s or 80s, it's not really looked back with fondness. And because of that, the members of Agalloch kind of had like this fallout with interest with metal music. And I do feel like the mantle, when you listen to it in full and notice that the metal influence has really kind of evaporated for the majority of the album, it's like a reflection of the times of what metal music was going through. Taking that all into consideration, it makes the melting pot of Agalloch, which was already large to begin with, grow exponentially to the point now where, I don't know, I almost feel weird calling the mantle a black metal album or a folk metal album, because so many different ideas and styles of music are being presented here that I really start questioning, like, what exactly is the mantle musically? Because go on Metal Archives, or go on Discogs, or Last.fm, or any other website that has profiles of artists, and I swear to God, the genre tags that Agalloch has, like post-black metal, post-metal, folk metal, this, that, it's like sentences worth of genre tags, to the point that I can understand as to why Agalloch just says, yeah, we're a metal band and that's it. Because it becomes word salad with genre tags. But I feel like the reason as to why they're always going to have like these metal tags under them is, yeah, they've always been integrated within metal. They introduce themselves as a metal band. It's just, when it comes to the mantle, it's like, I just say it's a really, really incredible album that, obviously has metal influences, but that's still selling it short in terms of like what you're going to hear musically on it. I don't know if this is going to help the conversation in terms of like truly understanding the music and sounds that you're going to hear on the mantle to describe it in just a few short words. But I remember seeing an interview where Don Anderson stated that probably the biggest impact that they had in terms of influence for writing the mantle would come from this obscure album by a band called Sand, who in 1991 released an album called The Dynamic Curve. And obviously out of curiosity I wanted to listen to it to see, and I kid you not, this album genuinely sounds like the prototype for the mantle. Like, it honestly felt like I went my whole life reading the New Testament, and then out of nowhere someone dropped the Old Testament to me when I discovered this, because it's so blatantly obvious where Agalloch got the influence to write all the melodies, riffs, and compositions for the mantle. Seriously, if you have not listened to this, and it's a big eye-opener if you're a fan of the mantle. Now, in terms of aesthetics and presentation, what I really admire a lot about the mantle is this is Agalloch, the band, owning up to their territory, making Portland, Oregon have the, I guess, atmosphere, tone, and overall look that makes it such a unique place to them. Just like with all the Norwegian black metal bands really owning to their, environment and surroundings to really make it something unique for their scene, Agalloch's doing the same, only now just for Portland, Oregon. I mean, just look at the album artwork. This would be of the Thompson Elk, which you would find at Portland, Oregon, although I do believe it's not up anymore after it got like vandalized or something. From what I heard, I could be wrong on that. But again, just something you would find specifically in Portland, Oregon, to just the layout of the vinyl. You're seeing all architecture of Portland, Oregon being presented here. So that's always something I've always admired, again, about this particular album. I've never been to Portland, Oregon, but honestly, as nerdy and dorky as I sound as a metal fan saying this, when I hear conversations of Portland, Oregon, I think of the imagery that Agalloch presented with the mantle. Another interesting component about Agalloch that I really don't see many people bring up in the conversation, and they cite it kind of a lot in terms of interviews, is how much cinema has affected Agalloch when it comes to their songwriting approach, because they've stated in numerous interviews that the works of Jodorowsky, Tarkovsky, and Bergman, just to name a few with their filmmaking, is somewhat represented here on The Mantle and other works by Agalloch. And this affects them, I believe, mentally and lyrically when it comes to Agalloch's work, showcasing the relationship between the idea of God, whether he's real or not, and just the overall conceptual piece of our understanding of God, how it affects us emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And that's somewhat represented here on The Mantle. Case in point, where Agalloch's really questioning the relationship between how people understand the conceptual piece of God and how it affects us emotionally, would come from the second song on here, In the Shadow of Our Pale Companion. There's a lyrical verse that goes, "Here at the edge of this world, here I gaze at a pantheon of oak, a citadel of stone. If this grand panorama before me is what you call God, then God is not dead." But on the musical side of things, make no mistake about it, I don't care if I am the millionth person to say this, it is such a gorgeous, emotive album from start to finish. You don't have to be a black metal fan or a metal fan to admire what's going on in this album. I really do feel like for people who just enjoy music as a whole, you can find something to admire about it. The composition is gorgeous and just really captivating. It's just all high-end quality stuff, and I think what makes this even more monumental is when you take into consideration this came out in 2002. For a lot of people, the turn of the millennia, the early 2000s, metal was in this awkward phase. It kind of plateaued a little bit in terms of innovation or what bands wanted to push boundaries with. Agalloch is one of the very, very few that was doing something innovative for metal during this time, and I think it's only aged like fine wine because of it. And with all of these different components and lyrical content you can get into and discuss, it's only aged all the better for a lot of people. And I feel like it's a humongous reason as to why, when you think of Agalloch, when you want to get into them, 10 out of 10 times this album will be brought up. It's impossible not to bring up Agalloch without bringing up The Mantle. And I feel like because of just how monumental every little aspect about it is, it's just gotten better with age. With the success of The Mantle, it would catapult Agalloch enough to start doing live shows, as originally they were just a studio-only band. And I believe that started around 2004 is when they started doing shows. And as one could imagine, if you're in the metal scene, you're Agalloch, you need to kind of adjust certain songs that way they don't, go on too long. Because let's be honest, whether you're attending an Agalloch show during this time, whether they are opening up for another metal band or other metal bands open up for Agalloch, I highly doubt the environment calls for songs to be of like 5 to 6 minutes of like these acoustic folk tracks that I don't think the metal scene at the time was really in the mood for. Thus, Agalloch with these live performances would have to adjust with some of their songwriting. They would make songs a little bit shorter with the acoustic portions and put more emphasis on the metal aspect of them when it came to live performances. It's also worth mentioning around, I believe, 2004 and 2008, Agalloch would release 2 more EPs, that being the Gray EP and the White EP. Going back to the reference I stated earlier that when it comes to Agalloch and EPs, they feel like extensions off of one particular style of music that's in their melting pot. And when it comes to the Gray EP and the White EP, honestly, these sound like extensions or B-sides of what could have been on The Mantle, honestly. Because with the Gray EP, this is Agalloch showcasing their metal side of like black metal, doom metal, post-metal, if you want to call it that. That in terms of the melody, structure, and riffs, it resembles that moody, emotive sound of Fields of the Nephilim, just all instrumentals. Where the White EP, this is Agalloch showcasing their neo-folk, folk, and electronic ambient side of things. That, again, it resembles the songwriting and approaches of all the folk sides of The Mantle. And I guess what I just find interesting about it during this time is Agalloch was being quite prolific with releases and really demonstrating all of their influences and inspirations just on their sleeves unapologetically. However, during this time in the mid-2000s, Agalloch did overwhelm themselves quite a bit, considering the mantle was just this monumental piece of all different genres and styles of music going left and right, that they felt as if they needed not really so much to backtrack, but go back to their roots to square one. So when you get to their third full-length album that was released in 2006, Ashes Against the Grain, it's more metal focused. So much so that I would say out of all of the full-length albums by Agalloch in their discography, if you primarily focus on just them, easily Ashes Against the Grain is the most black metal fueled that they've done. Songs in here like Falling Snow, Our Fortress is Burning, and Not Unlike the Waves. Clearly black metal is their primary source of influence here. I mean, hell, when I saw Agalloch last year at the Maryland Death Fest, a good portion of their set came from Ashes Against the Grain. Even in interviews, Agalloch states that they wanted to make more of a rock out, jam out type of album, because really what Ashes Against the Grain is, when you look at their timeline, it's more of a product of Agalloch wanting to make music primarily for concerts. If by some chance you don't know who Agalloch are, you've never listened to them, and you're more of a black metal purist, or you're just an adrenaline junkie within extreme metal, at the very least, if you want to get into Agalloch, give Ashes Against the Grain a chance. Because it's clear just by how the band talks about it to what you're going to hear on this album, it's tailored more to the black metal fans. Not like this should validate it more or less, but it's something to consider. Even on the Metal Archives, when it comes to their reviews and the average percentage that they give an album, the highest rated album on the Metal Archives in the Agalloch discography is Ashes Against the Grain. And I truly do feel like it's because it's Agalloch really trying to embrace the whole metal sound that they should be kind of like known for within the metal scene. 4 years later, in 2010, we would get the fourth full-length album by Agalloch, that being Marrow of the Spirit. Stylistically, I've always viewed Marrow of the Spirit as the most atmospheric and polished out of everything within the Agalloch discography, that when it comes to the melting pot that I always refer to it as, with all the different styles of music that they're known for playing around with, they're not adding in anything different that they haven't done before, and really just sticking to their strengths here. I do feel like what makes this album the most atmospheric of the bunch within the Agalloch discography is during this time in the 2010s to late 2000s, Agalloch was doing a lot more live shows and gigs, and one country they toured in was in Romania. And even in interviews they stated that they spent a few weeks of time within Romania in the Carpathian mountain range, thus being in that environment really rubbed off on them in terms of, songwriting as such. And I guess for me personally, from what I noticed and know of black metal, is with all these atmospheric black metal bands, at least within Europe, they showcase a lot of appreciation for the landscape and environment of like mountain ranges or, forests. And I feel like Agalloch being within that environment rubbed off on them with their mindset and overall approach on this album. Songs on here like They Escape the Weight of Darkness, which is just a 3.5 minute long instrumental track of just cellos being played, it still feels like there's played with a little bit of melancholy and a bit of thickness with how the string instruments are produced, that again resembles more of the atmospheric black metal approach that bands do within interludes, to the 17 long minute behemoth track Black Lake, which showcases more ambient interludes within it, still have some density to it. So just to me at least, this has always felt like the most atmospheric black metal album Agalloch has. This can be stated for like everything Agalloch has ever done, at least with their full-length albums, but I do truly feel like out of all of them, the one that needs to be heard from beginning to end all the time is Marrow of the Spirit, because that's where you truly immerse yourself again within that atmosphere. Before I get into talking about the last full-length album that Agalloch would release, I do feel like there's one other EP that's really important to talk about that everyone seems to gloss over for some reason, or at least most do, and it should not be ignored. That being an EP that Agalloch released in 2012 called Faustian Echoes. This EP contains only one song, that being the title track, Faustian Echoes, and it goes on for 21 and a half minutes long, being the longest Agalloch song that they would ever release, and without a shadow of a doubt, the most black metal release they would ever do. Like, seriously, this song embodies the word black metal in every which way possible with its essence. From the music on here, that's a lot more tremolo pick guitars, it's a lot harsher, the drumming's a lot faster, there's only harsh vocals executed within it, no clean singing, and everything is just black metal musically. To even the lyrics on this, which are clearly black metal inspired, all having to do with Faust, a story and individual that's been referenced by so many other black metal bands, it's just too many to name, to even utilizing audio samples from the 1984 film Faust, done by Jean Svankmajer, which this film, it is so off the rails. I love every minute of it. My wife and I were watching it about a year or two ago, and we were laughing our heads off watching it. It is such a fun movie to watch. I can't recommend it enough. But as I stated, this whole song that goes on for 21 and a half minutes, it's just unapologetically black metal. Then, of course, in 2014, Agalloch would release, as of right now, being their last full-length album. That, of course, being The Serpent and the Spear. An album that was highly anticipated, as I believe this was the height of their popularity during this time. As I remember when this album was released, I was just getting into more like underground metal and extreme metal, and it felt like it was this big event happening when The Serpent and the Spear finally dropped. So many people were reviewing it, so many people were talking highly about it, tours were being announced immediately, and I remember going to the tour in 2014 when this album was released and just being in awe at their performance, even though a majority of it at that point, they were playing a lot more material off of the Mantle. I was just completely mesmerized by this band, and I immediately became a fan of them. And it sucks getting into them that late with, obviously The Serpent and the Spear, because we all know what happens a little bit after. But regardless, before I jump too ahead of myself, let's get a little bit of a discussion going on now with the last and fifth full-length album by Agalloch. Once again, Agalloch plays around with all of their strengths here on The Serpent and the Spear. I don't really know what to state about it that makes it kind of stand out compared to Ashes Against the Grain or The Mantle or Pale Folklore, because it kind of just feels like what Agalloch is doing here at this point, and I don't want to sound lazy here, is once again, just like with Marrow of the Spirit, they're playing with their strengths. All of the styles of music you know them for, they're just doing it again here. Not that that's a bad thing, because it's still written very well and it's still very much an engaging piece of music. It's just, to be honest here, not to sell it short, it's not really the album that comes to mind when I'm in the mood to listen to Agalloch, because it just feels like it's Agalloch being Agalloch with no really standout features other than it's just them doing it. But if I'm going to truly nitpick here to really flesh out what makes The Serpent and the Spear have its own distinct characteristics within the Agalloch discography, is I've always viewed this album that this has a lot more progressive ideas with their songwriting. Not calling them a progressive metal band, but with previous albums when they play around with all of the styles of music that we know them for, like for instance folk music, they'll isolate it within certain portions. Like on The Mantle, there's portions that it's just strictly folk being played with certain tracks, and then other tracks on that album is just black metal. Or with Pale Folklore, there's portions that it's just the more atmospheric, moody black metal mixed with goth rock influences, and then it transitions to songs that are just keyboards done with neoclassical influence. With The Serpent and the Spear, it's all kind of blended together now. They're not isolating certain subgenres by themselves. So some songs in here will go from black metal to folk to post-metal and post-rock as such. Thus, even though they're still playing with all the ideas we know them for, the songwriting and the overall connection and flow of it is a lot more progressive. Personally, how I view The Serpent and the Spear is that if you're trying to get into Agalloch, you're new to them, don't listen to this album right away. I really do feel like The Serpent and the Spear is meant for people who are like the die-hard Agalloch fans, the Agalloch purists, the Agalloch fans that have been with them since day one, who admire the ambitions and experimentations that Agalloch has done, blending all of these different forms of music that are outside of metal within metal, making them their own unique entity, and admiring them for what truly makes them Agalloch as a whole. So, to me personally, this is an album just genuinely tailored for the die-hard fans for the band. As I'm sure you're all aware where this leads up to, but before I get into that event, I just remember after this album was released, just always seeing Agalloch fans who are always, like die-hard Agalloch fans, I should state, just praising the living hell out of them and thinking like they're on this new high, nothing's going to stop them, the sky's the limit for Agalloch now. And everyone, right after The Serpent and the Spear released, and I'm seeing all these ends of the year lists, seeing it like in the top 5 or album of the year. I remember like really thinking like, damn, what's next for this band? I'm so excited for it. I thought that they were just kind of unstoppable, at least when it came to more of the atmospheric, more unconventional side of black metal. They just seemed to be at the head helm of it just everywhere. And then of course that leads into May of 2016, just out of the blue, no one saw it coming, and it really hit hard for a lot of fans. Agalloch just announced that they would split up. I really don't want to focus any attention with the whole drama side of things that happened with the breakup, mainly because here we are now in 2025 and it's over the past year and a half all water under the bridge, so there's no point in reopening up old wounds. But again, I remember in 2016 when they announced their abrupt breakup, a lot of people were bummed by it. Like, if you were an Agalloch fan, you didn't have to be a diehard, just even a moderate fan, you were upset by it because people would just praise them to the moon and back whenever they released an album. It felt like a really big event was happening when they would announce an album. To live shows felt like these really big life experiences. Hell, I felt like pretty lucky to say the least for a while. I've seen them at least once, where many other people who I would state are even bigger fans than me still have yet to see them. Hell, I'm lucky enough I've seen them now twice at this point. But it felt like every single news source you can think of that would cover music or metal was talking about this breakup so much, and it felt like this monumental catastrophe happened within metal. And I mean, sure, all of the members that were in Agalloch started their own, personal side projects or other bands, as both Jason and Don would continue on with Sculptured, again, of that more progressive death metal approach, and John would start up another band called Pelorian, which is more in vein of just straight up stripped down black metal. And while it's cool that they were releasing music still, none of it really lasted or had that much of an impression on the metal fan base, as really all people were hoping for is that they would put their differences and baggage aside and somehow reform and continue on with Agalloch one day. That one day would come in 2023 when they would announce a reunion show in Portland, Oregon. And even though I didn't attend it, because Portland, Oregon's on the complete opposite end of the country for me, I remember just reading upon it and hearing it as if it was, again, another big, giant event that was happening, and hearing stories that people from all over the globe were going to that show, from all over Europe, such as Germany and the UK, to all over the country. People would attend just this one night show for Agalloch's reunion. Hearing the news about that show, it gave promise to the fact that Agalloch would continue on at least doing other special shows. Hence why in 2024, last year, they were able to do another show at the Maryland Death Fest when they had to replace My Dying Bride. And again, it felt like this monumental event was happening, even though they are just one of the many bands that were performing at the Maryland Death Fest. It felt like the world stopped as a whole, honestly, when they played at the Maryland Death Fest, and it was easily one of the standout performances of last year's MDF. I know now, since they have reformed, doing reunion shows and doing like these one-off performances either at festivals, whether it be in Portland, Oregon, to the Prophecy Festival, to, again, last year's Maryland Death Fest, and God knows what else they'll do. I know they've been asked again if they're going to continue on maybe doing tours or maybe even doing another full-length album, and a lot of it's kind of still like up in the air as terms of like what the future holds for Agalloch. But I feel like for a lot of people right now, myself included, I think everyone's just happy that they got back together. They're happy that it states now in the Metal Archives or on any other website that Agalloch is active at the moment. They're performing live shows. The people that missed out on the experience of seeing Agalloch, they now have this second chance to do so. And just to be honest, for the time being, I'm not really holding my breath for Agalloch to release new material. I'm not really holding my breath for Agalloch to do this massive tour around the world. I'm just happy that Agalloch is back for the time being. And I'm just happy that Agalloch is just still a thing. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, everything I talked about will be in the description below, all linked up. Really curious to know what you think of Agalloch, what other little tidbits of information you want to provide here from your own personal experiences, or what I may have left out, because I know, again, there's so much to discuss with this band. And that is that. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.